Good morning, everyone. Today is Wednesday, 10 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. I feel like I'm saying the same phrase over and over again, but it gets you used to our live streams because that means that we're back. We're back again with another live Q&A. It's again all three of us. It's been a couple of weeks that we haven't done a three-person live Q&As, but now everyone's back to office. Everyone's busy working, and we're really happy to see everyone. For those who just pile in, please leave a comment. Let us know where you tune in from. We'll give you a shout out, and then we'll have a little friendly chat before we start answering those questions. But before we start answering those questions, please make sure you post the questions in the comments. Mark and Alicia, how are you guys doing?
Doing well, Igor. We just went to Newfoundland for 2 weeks, so my family and I had a fantastic time hiking and up and down coastal trails and lots of national parks, and it was amazing. It was really, really beautiful.
I was really excited to hear that you saw puffins in Newfoundland.
Yeah, yeah, the
Those are,
puffins were the highlights. They're so great. They have one of the closest viewing sites for puffins in North America, so or only puffin viewing sites. So the Atlantic puffins are right out there, and you can go sit on the hill, and they're literally on the island right next to you, and you can just watch them fishing and diving, and they're so awkward when they fly. And then a couple of them actually came to our island and flew and sat next to us, so nobody moved, and we were all watching them, and then they flew off. It was really neat.
Hmm.
really
That's
nice.
awesome. That is
What
so
about
cool. The craziness of August is now past. So my son and his new bride are just getting ready to head back down to Rexburg, Idaho here. So I gave him a couple quick hugs before we jumped on the live. And his brother and his new bride are down in Mexico on their honeymoon right now. So we had two weddings this August. Actually, there was three. Two were my sons. One was a nephew, and then we had Adam's graduation, and we had a short little 4-day camping vacation down in Montana. And now we're just recovering from a very, very busy summer, but super excited to be back with all of us here again at the firm.
Yeah, and we've been foraging mushrooms with my wife. This Saturday, we got a lot of aspen mushrooms, and they are very tasty. And then we found a guy who sells chanterelle mushrooms. So all of a sudden, we realized that we're mushroom fans, and that's one of the perks of living in Alberta because you have so many forests where you can hunt mushrooms, forage them, and yeah, it was wonderful to have the long weekend break. But now we're back to work, and so um, I can't believe it's already September. I
Yeah.
can't believe it. Like time flew by, like summer just passed, like somewhere by. I just did not have time to enjoy summer, and I feel like everyone in our office worked really hard this summer, especially with people who are desperate finding answers, how they can stay, how they can overturn the refusals that are unreasonable. And there are so many other problems that we
Yeah.
experience in our practice like these days that we did not experience in the past. All right. So on this note, I think it's a good time for us to actually dive into the comments. Again, we have 45 people watching right now. For those who are watching, please leave your questions in the comment section because if we don't have questions, then we will have nothing to discuss. Okay, so let's give a couple of shout outs first. So we'll start with Adeniki from Nigeria. Hello to you. We also have Sony TV Alexa. Hi from India, looking for permanent residence. And then Anai sends a comment from Cameroon. Um, Actually, Anai is the last name, Derek. Derek says a comment from Cameroon. And then we have questions. Okay. So I'll pull up this one. Will federal government increase PNP quota for provinces in 2025?
Oh, I just saw on a separate, like, politics and immigration are just like oil and water. Like, what's good for politics is never good for immigration. And it seems like what's good for immigration is never good for politics. And so I was just reading a report, I think it was CBC, about Polyev, recommending the scrapping of the temporary foreign worker program. And the only reason that we are in the situation we are right now is because there was an election and the Liberal government felt that they needed to take the steps they did to ensure their votes. And it's always this way. So what will happen next year? What will happen October, end of October, beginning of November, when they do the next levels plans? Too bad we don't have the crystal ball here, Igor, because it is so hard to tell. And we would like to think that the government will return some of those spots that they've taken from the PNPs. But I'll be honest, right now, their efforts to get people out of the country are being thwarted by us. And so the reality is, I think they're going to continue to stick to the status quo, at least for the interim. We'll see what happens. I wish I was, to some extent now, I wish I was on our national executive still and had a little bit more of an inside view of what was happening within immigration. But I don't know. What are your thoughts, Alicia?
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, I think there was a Globe and Mail article letter from the editor that was saying, it's important that the Conservatives, when Polyev is saying that, immigration's out of control, it's important that you're looking at the proper context of what's happening, because those numbers basically show net zero immigration, right? We're basically at 0.0% because the numbers are actually broken down for renewals of work permits. And so people actually who are newly entering the country are very few. So that's really important to keep in context. So I think probably it's going to be status quo. I think it's unlikely. I agree with you, Mark. I think it's unlikely that they give more PNP nominations back to the provinces unless like some of the maritime provinces have done, they've actually said, okay, well, we're going to negotiate an agreement with the federal government where we're looking at refugee and resettlement programs, and kind of in recompense for doing that, then they have some more provincial allocations that are given back to them under the PNP.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's move on to the next question then. This one is from Laura. Do I need to do a medical exam and submit biometrics again after doing that for my study permit application? Wow, that's a good question. That is a good question. So
And
it really
maybe
depends,
Igor,
Laura.
yeah, maybe Igor, you can pull up the program guidance. So
Hmm.
yes, they announced that people do need to do biometrics and medicals. So there are some temporary public policies that may or may not apply to you given your situation, but medical exams are now something that are required again. So if you didn't do them before, then you definitely need to make sure that you've done those medical exams, upfront medical exams, when you are submitting a express entry application. So we're not exactly sure what stage you're at, Laura. So if you've already done some medical exams, maybe Igor, you can make that bigger, read it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as of August 21st, you must do another medical exam. If you applying under Express Entry and you submitting your EAPR application, typically before they would send you a request, before they were ready to finalize your application, now you have to do it upfront. But Alicia, there is a catch, right? And I can pull up my previous page here, and maybe we can talk about this in a little more detail.
Mm-hmm. So yes, you do need to do your medical exams. And I think all of us would agree, if there's any doubt and you're not sure, just do another medical exam. Just go to another panel physician, get another updated medical exam and submit it if there's any doubt. But they do have a temporary public policy that they said that they are extending. So if your previous medical exam was within the last 5 years of submitting your application. So if you get an ITA and you're submitting your EAPR, backdate your date 5 years, and then make sure that you include, usually they give you that 1017B form. It's got your photo and a little barcode on top. Make sure that you include a copy of that in addition to the IME number, I would say. And then the thing is that when you have that medical report, there can't be something that requires follow-up. So just you need to make sure that you've read through that medical report as well to make sure that there wasn't something that was problematic, like ongoing tuberculosis review or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's interesting because when people submit their EAPR, they have this mandatory field to upload a medical report form. And so, what would you recommend uploading there, Alicia? Do you recommend just uploading their old medical exam form, report form, or you would also recommend adding a letter of explanation there?
Yeah, I normally recommend a letter of explanation. So I'll say, here's the letter of explanation for when I did the medical. Here are all the, I will actually take a screenshot of this, right? So I'll say, yes, it's required to do the medical. And then here is why I think I'm included in the temporary public policy for not needing to do another one. And then go through each point. You applied or applying for PR. They're already living in Canada. You've completed the previous one within the last 5 years, and it showed low risk or no risk to public health and safety. So I actually include this screenshot in addition to the LOE plus the medical exam result. But just like I said before, if there's any concern or you're not sure, just go get a new one just in case, because it's just not worth it. Those ITAs are precious. You do not want to squander them.
Exactly. All right. So the next question will be from does remote work experience count to as for foreign work experience if you don't have a work visa or citizenship of that country? Let's say I was working for the US company remotely and I didn't have the work visa for the US.
So I guess this comes down to what you define as remote. Were you in the US illegally and didn't have a visa or work authorization, or were you outside of the US providing kind of freelance remote work from a different country? Ultimately, there's nothing in the act, I don't believe, that would necessarily disqualify work experience gained in a country without proper work authorization. However, it comes down to proving it. And that's where you often run into problems when you have an employer that is not remitting any withholdings, taxes for your employment. They're probably not really willing to give you a reference letter saying, yes, I employed you without authorization in my country, and then use that to provide to a foreign government. And when it comes to the United States, there's information sharing across the board. Now, I'm not saying that the US will say, or Canada will tell the US, hey, this employer is employing people illegally, but who knows what they're sharing or what they're discussing. I can't help, Igor, to think that the fact we were very transparent in your application about the situation, that happened with your status in the US, that it was just too convenient for the US to then, be asking you to come in for an immigration, into immigration court, essentially,
Right.
So it just seems like too big of a coincidence. So who knows what they share? But I think, sure, it might be possible, but yeah, if you're outside of the US, you're not going to have an issue as long as the employer can provide what's needed, but you can run into problems evidentiary. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd add to that too is you can also run into problems with police certificates and travel history. And so it really depends how you define where your employer is. So when you're filling out your work history, it's going to ask you, where was this job, right? The location of work and then your employer. And so it really depends on how you define that, because if it seems like you're somewhere, but you don't have valid work authorization there and you weren't physically there, it might trigger a police certificate request, right? So, or sometimes if you're in countries, you've got to show your entry-exit records if you're looking at your travel history. So just be careful in terms of how you describe where you were if you have remote work in your profile. It sometimes gets a little bit complicated and you may need to have letters of explanation.
Exactly. I have a client right now, and she's completing her studies from Scotland remotely while being physically present in Canada. And so the document checklist in her expert entry EAPR application asked her to provide a police certificate from Scotland. And she has like 2 days to go. And so she was like in this absolute panic mode. Like, what do I do? I will not be able to submit my EAPR. And then for these kind of situations, you need to provide a letter of explanation. Just explain that you've never been physically present in the United States for more than 6 months. In fact, you're not working in person for that employer. You work remotely. All right. So the next question would be again from Laura, is it possible to submit a profile under Express Entry and ARIMA at the same time?
This is a great question. Let's face it, everyone, we're trying to maximize as many possible avenues that we can because we don't know which one's going to work. So I get it. Laura, maybe you live in Quebec and theoretically you can count your work experience in Quebec towards express entry. But at the end of the day, that process requires that you demonstrate an intention. So you intend, it's kind of a subjective thing that they try to evaluate objectively, that you will live outside the province of Quebec when you become a permanent resident of Canada. Well, if you also are going through ARIMA at the same time, there is the there's the equal expectation that you will demonstrate an intent to live in the province of Quebec. So when you have two applications and you're saying in both of them that you have an intention to either live in Quebec or live outside Quebec, well, it can be very problematic as your applications go forward. There's information sharing between those programs. And so if you're saying you have an intention, in both and that intention is contradictory, it can be very problematic.
Yeah. Mark, I'll pull up this question. You've answered it briefly. So today, Pierre Poilievre announced his intention to phase out temporary foreign worker program. What are your thoughts on this proposal? We've touched on it earlier today, but let's tackle this one more time.
So there are a lot of public policy reasons why a temporary foreign worker program is really important for the country. There's a lot. Whether it's the temporary foreign worker program, he was silent on the international mobility program. Maybe he only meant the LMIA regime. Maybe, I don't know. But if I was to go back to, I think it was a series of blog posts I wrote. I think it was in 2015, maybe. And if you were to go to the Canadian Immigration Podcast.com website, you would find those. And it hit at a time in my practice when I was overrun with people being exploited by employers under the temporary foreign worker program. And in Alberta, it's very similar to today. You could not change employers or you would jeopardize your PR. So some employers that were not really great actors took advantage of that and exploited their workers, not unlike today. So 10 years later, it's a very similar situation in some instances. And so I wrote a 4-part blog post to the minister, both of the Employment Social Development Canada and Immigration, saying to just scrap it, just toss it out. And good employers, if they're really good, when they recruit people will want to stay because you treat them right. And if you allow them all to be completely free agents, well, then it will naturally self-select. The garbage employers will go out of business, and the good employers that treat workers really well and treat them fairly will want them to stay. Like they'll choose to stay, but have them come in as permanent residents. And it was a little naive at that stage. I was still relatively new in my practice, I guess within the first 10 years. And there's more nuance to it than that, because there are some industries where it's just hard to get people to work. Canadians don't want to do that. It's hard work. It's maybe you're sloshing in the cow manure at a feedlot and, over the height of your gumboots, as we say, your rubber boots. And, not many people want to do that kind of work. And so there is a role for it. But the problem always has been enforcement. How do you enforce the provisions? How do you administer the program in a way that's fair to employers who invest a lot of money to bring people over, and also at the same time protect workers from exploitation when they really don't have any options when they come? So if they come and the employer is not a great employer, I've got an individual right now who came over and was working as it so happens, on a farm, had an LMIA for 2 years. And after coming here and working for only about 3 months, he was laid off by the employer because they discovered the working holiday program and they could bring over other workers from Holland and pay them minimum wage, not the prevailing wage. So they laid off all their LMIA-based workers and just dove into the International Experience Canada program. And this great guy had a family and a wife and kids, and he's authorized to stay here, but only to work for that employer. And at the time, we were seeing very lengthy processing on LMIAs, and this happened, last fall. And so he now has some opportunities, but now he's having to wait and no work till he can switch to another employer. So you have the LMIA processing time, and then the work permit processing time is really quite high as well. So that's a long kind of explanation of my view. So no, I don't think the temporary foreign worker program should be scrapped outright. But I do think there's something to, putting the onus on employers to really create an environment where people want to stay. There has to be some kind of a balance where a worker maybe is brought in within a certain occupation and they can move employers, so that if you've got, a competitor who's not, running a very good business and not treating their workers well, the workers can just slide over and work for you if that's where the shortage is. So, but how does that play out in practice? That's for someone with a higher pay grade than me, but that's my thoughts on it.
Alicia, do you have any other comments here?
Yeah, I will say I agree with Mark. I don't think that we should be throwing out the entire temporary foreign worker program. Mark and I have been practicing for over 20 years. We've seen all the incarnations of this. We saw when Kenny was around and he wanted to completely put a moratorium basically on the temporary foreign worker program. And then employers get upset, right? They say, we cannot function properly. Our business is going to suffer. We cannot innovate. We don't have the people that we need. Like, let's be honest, the world is not black and white, right? There are so many complications and nuances, and things are complex. And there are situations where a temporary foreign worker program solution might be the only solution. Most employers do not want to go there because it is a huge pain, and ESDC has done a good job of making it a huge pain. And so for most employers, it's kind of the option of last resort. And I think that's what it's supposed to be. And so they make it hard, and they make it hard on purpose. And so for the employers who go through that gauntlet of actually doing it properly, they have really beefed up the enforcement and the compliance reviews. So it used to be that they didn't have a public blacklist. They didn't really have teeth in terms of the legislation for criminal sanctions and for refusals to process an LMIA or actually the ability to cancel. They have all that now. So they've really kind of upped the compliance regime and they've upped the penalties. And so those are now tools that they are actually implementing, and it is working. So I don't think that it needs to be completely scrapped as a program.
Oh, how fitting. Okay, it just dropped in my inbox, you guys. Uh, from from one of the mainstream media. I'm a producer. We're looking at doing a piece this week on immigration. We'd like to look at the temporary foreign worker program, and the conservative suggestion it should be scrapped. We'd like to look at how the liberal reforms are playing out. Would you have time to have a little chat? So how fitting, hey? Like literally just this second in my inbox. So I think this is Alicia's wheelhouse, though. She's an expert with this particular organization, so she's already had some good exposure, and I think she'd be fantastic for me to pass that over. So I might say something that, and it's all good. It's all good. How well timed. Hey, maybe she's watching the live right now. All right. We've got lots to say. So yes, we'd be happy to join you on your live presentation. Okay, good stuff.
Perfect. We do have some questions on what do we expect for the rest of the 2025 in terms of the score. This one is particular for the CEC. Do we think that the score will stay the same, go up, go down? What are our thoughts? And maybe while we're answering this question, one of you, I will share my screen and we'll go to rounds of invitations in here.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to start off, Alicia, on this one?
Yeah, so yes, I think they will continue to do CEC draws. We really have not seen FSW draws, right? It's been, I think, almost a year since we've seen, or maybe more than a year since we've seen a full federal skilled worker draw. Does that mean that people outside of Canada without Canadian work experience can never get an ITA? No. Why? because in addition to doing CEC draws, they're also doing category-based draws. So they have a few of the trades, they have healthcare draws, and they have francophone draws. So most people who are federal skilled worker eligible, who have work experience outside of Canada, are getting an invitation to apply under one of the category-based draws. So there still is hope if you are outside of Canada, but you do need to have very targeted language experience or language capability, work experience, and a high CRS score. So what do we think for CEC? Well, we can kind of see right here that, they have done a CEC draw. The most recent one was beginning of August, so it's been nearly a month, and it wasn't a super big draw. There was only 1,000 ITAs that went out. And I think, Igor, this is pretty small, but I think it's 534 here on my screen there. So that was the CRS cutoff, and they haven't done another CEC draw. So it's been a month. So my guess is probably that CRS is going to be a little bit higher than what it's at now. It won't really have ticked down very far. It might be around the same level.
Mark, do you have anything else to add?
No, not really. Like the biggest thing for people that people have to understand is obviously the numbers drive the score. Higher the number of invitations, the score goes down. But some people are thinking that it's going to go down a little bit sooner. But they forget, just because of the fact people are going to have to go home or they're not going to be able to continue working and things like that. But remember, you just need 1 year and 3 years. And so that whole concept, like we've talked about a lot on our live stream, the scores are not going to start coming down substantially for some time. And individuals who choose to go home at times, well, there's going to be a lot of people that will likely need to explore that as the reality for them. They will be able to be outside of the country for almost 2 full years and still be eligible for an ITA under CEC, because they'll still retain 1 year of Canadian work experience within the previous 3, which is the requirement. So I don't see these scores coming down anytime soon. And that's why the PNP reduction is so damning for people, because the scores, like to qualify through the Canadian experience class, are going to continue to be sky high. Like Alicia, I don't see these things dropping below 515 even anytime soon. Maybe if they were to do another 3 by 3 by 3, and if you go back, Igor, and you look at the Canadian experience class, like July right there through that first one was in June, there was those 3 really close within, about a 3-week period or so. And that pushed it down to 518. But we haven't seen anything like that so far this year. Now, in fairness, if they have plans of, are they going to hold? That's the issue. Are they going to hold to the levels plans for next year? Which, Igor, if you can just pull up the annual levels plans for that, the 2025, 6, 27, and just take a quick peek at their annual levels plans for 2026, because everyone, this is now what they're extending ITAs for, not this year, but for next year, because they expect it's going to be, September. When you submit your EAPR, it's not going to be approved probably until 2026. So if we take a look at the variation between what they project for 2025 and what they expect for 2026, that's going to be a pretty good indicator of what's to come. So thank you. Yeah, that's the one we're looking at. So if you look here at the top, federal economic priorities, that's important to note. You can see that it is going to go up a little bit next year. So 41,700 to 47. However, the in-Canada focus is going to drop a little bit. So about 7,000 less. It's going to go down from 82 to 75. And then the overall levels, if you just drop down to the bottom of the economic, we can see here that the overall levels are supposed to drop just slightly by about 3,000, it looks, or so. And so all of these things play a role. So we're now starting to dip into 2026 with the ITAs and even the PNPs. But you can see, because the provinces just don't know what they're going to have for next year, they are all absolutely loath to start issuing nominations until they know what the world looks like next year.
Yeah, and it's interesting how the numbers for PNPs remain consistent throughout the next 3 years.
Yeah, they're not. They say they're not going to change. And now theoretically, they could go as high as 65,000. They could divvy out a few more to some provinces, which I think they have to some extent divvied out a little bit more to some of the provinces that are willing to play ball a little bit more on the settlement side. So we'll see. It's kind of like I don't know what the proper analogy is, but it's who's gonna cave first? Are the provinces that are holding out saying, no, we're not going to take more refugees? Are they going to say, okay, look, we have to cooperate with the feds if we want to get our economic people transitioned? Otherwise, our employers are going to see their employees leave. And on this whole topic, if you look at the very top, Igor, this is important too. So if we look at the top where it says overall French speaking permanent resident admissions outside Quebec, guys, this is a big, big factor. And 8.5%, and then next year it's supposed to be 9.5. I think that's a number we're going to see jump next year. So I think that percentage of overall numbers that are really targeting Francophone speakers is going to be a lot higher. And as we see things unfold, we know that there was a big budget announcement, and maybe, Igor, now would be a good time to pull up that by Minister Diab. This was a few months back, but they have very ambitious plans to help with resettlement across the country, targeting underrepresented groups. French are within that category, and there is $3.2 billion that has been allocated federally to over 500 organizations with settlement. And this could be many of the existing organizations, but I know that there's been a lot of new ones that have been created, essentially, that meet the requirements of what they're trying to achieve. But you can see this was July 23rd, so I guess it has only been a little over a month. And this was very quietly released. I don't remember a big announcement about this, but $3.2 billion over 3 years across more than 520 organizations outside Quebec to improve the integration of newcomers, including into the job market, and to reduce labor shortages. And so I'm going to have a meeting here, Alicia. I'm going to try to pull you in too, with an organization here in Alberta that appears to be new, that has a whack of money that they've been awarded to help with finding jobs for French-speaking candidates. And they don't have a standard as to really what the French is, but generally speaking, it's kind of French as your primary language, and to help them find employment across Alberta. And we know there's French language schools as well to help with the further integration of French across the country, which I don't think any of us have a problem with that. We're a bilingual country. I have no issues. I think, every day I think, oh, should I start learning some French? My attempts in high school were somewhat feeble, but I did have a French 30. And then after that, when I learned Portuguese, it fugiu is what I say. It fled away when I learned Portuguese. But there's new schools popping up, French schools. And so the only side, which I'm always very sensitive to, is the fact that the money has to come from somewhere. So one of the avenues that they've pulled the money from is the English language programs. So we're seeing a lot of our post-secondary institutions that have English kind of upgrading and things like that, classes in preparation for getting admitted to university, and other English programs. We've seen them close, like the one here in Lethbridge at our Polytechnic. It's been around for over 50 years. And this past year, they had to close it because they had their funding gone. It was pulled from the federal government. And I get the need to place emphasis on where your priorities are. But I think sometimes government does, they just take too big a bite out of things sometimes and don't really do things in more measured ways. I think if they had taken the approach of maybe reducing the funding a little bit and asking them to scale it back so that they can expand maybe some of the other settlement, the funding to some of the other settlement organizations, I think people would be okay. I get it. But to see it go completely is just really sad. Now, with that being said, my wife and I and some other awesome people here in Lethbridge, last September, there was a need for English language training back then before the program was even canceled. And so we started a free English language class here, which our local Immigrant Services, a settlement organization here in Lethbridge, has very graciously given us all the space in the world we want for this year for September. So we have access to Lethbridge Immigrant Services. They're building in the evenings on Thursday night. So if anyone's listening from Lethbridge and they know someone that's looking for some language training, we were going to do a level 1 and a level 2, but the demand for level 3 is there. And now we got the space. So it's in that same facility, Igor, that you and I did the presentation to the Ukrainian community. And it's just so kind of them to do that. I have the key cards, I got the locks, I got the passcodes, everything here. And And we're really excited about that for September. So it's a service that's needed, and the community is stepping up to do it at no cost, and when we now don't have to pay for the facility, which we did, last semester, it's just going to open up so many avenues. So, and that's what community is about. That's what Canada is about, right? Pitching in and caring about your neighbor more than you care about yourself, and just giving. So cool. Anyways, so those are some thoughts. So government, you don't have to do such big bites. You can kind of do things in more measured, thoughtful ways versus alienating people, because that's what you've done essentially with this. There's people that you've alienated.
I can tell
All
for
right.
sure that I hear a lot more French on the streets in Calgary
Mhm. Yeah.
compared to how it was a couple of years ago. Like in my neighborhood, I just walk on the streets and every
Yeah.
20th person speaks French. And I
Yeah.
I thought like that would never be a reality in Alberta,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
at least in my lifetime. But
Yeah.
things
But
change.
it's great. It's great, to be bilingual and be able to speak multiple languages. And effectively, that's what the federal government has done for all newcomers, like all of them. So if you don't have an option, you better start studying French. And I even advised our local immigration partnership. I said, you employers, you need to let your employers know that if they want to keep their workers, they need to engage with the French language instruction and allow the workers to, even if their English is moderate. That's the irony of this. Like for Alberta, it's a level 6, right? So for the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program, it's a level 6. If they hit a level 7 or higher on the French side, level 9 on the French side, like they're pretty much guaranteed permanent residence. And that's even maybe if they only have a college or technical education, right?
Right.
So
It's kind of like this Albert, wait, this evolution theory, right? You have to adapt to new realities,
mhm.
and
Yeah,
like when we tell people that you have to learn French, their first
yeah,
reaction is denial, like no
yeah,
way, like I'm not
mhm,
going to be able to do it, and
yeah,
then their next reaction is anger, like oh this government, they're pulling so many francophones, like, and then they become really mad, and then they slowly start to accept it, and the question is how fast you start to accept it and act on it, because we've been talking about French like for the last 3 years now, and then you
mm,
can see like up to 2027 the share of francophones will increase as well, and so as soon as you pass this anger stage and denial stage and start acting on it, the sooner you do it, the better is your chance that you will survive and pass this evolution stage to become a permanent
mhm,
resident, essentially.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
All
That's
right.
exactly it.
Okay, so on this note, let's move on to a couple of questions. For example, Cynthia. Cynthia is asking about French and whether she has a shot at immigrating through healthcare category or francophone category. And so she provides a lot of information about her French language scores. Um, and she says that she works in the healthcare sector, but we don't know in what occupation for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. And understand, like, the answer is pretty simple, Cynthia. You don't really choose.
mhm,
So you just put your application in, you fill up all of the information on your human capital, your language, your work experience. You enter it into the portal, you select the proper knock code, not the one that you think you want to fit to get into a particular category-based draw, but the one that actually matches the work that you've done. As long as it's at a skill level, then immigration will decide based on your point threshold whether or not you have a sufficient level to receive an ITA.
mhm.
And with most of the provinces, there are still some, although I don't know how long it's been since there's been a human capital priority stream draw for Ontario or Alberta just selecting an express entry candidate outside of the country. Very, very unlikely these days. But generally for express entry, Cynthia, if you know French, that's it's going to be a benefit to your application no matter which stream they do. But for you, in order to get through right now with express entry, it's all French, because they're really, unless you're category based draw, French really drives the ship. And yeah, with the CEC only draws, you're in kind of the category based world. So
And
Yeah.
probably the same answer goes to this person as well. Like, other advantages to being eligible for more than one category. Like just like Cynthia, you may be eligible for francophone and healthcare category. It just determines how fast you will receive the ITA and through what category.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think it's a good way to visualize it is here's what's in your court and here's what's in immigration's court. And so in terms of here's what's in your court, you've got to make sure you've got the up-to-date language tests, your education credential assessments, and you have to have valid results. And then you've got to make sure you're putting in a correct profile, because the other thing with federal skilled workers, so if you're looking at the FSW category, you have to make sure you're passing. So you've got to hit that 67 pass mark in terms of your selection grid points. So if you've done that, then it's worthwhile to go through the process of submitting an express entry profile. And then it's going to give you a CRS score, a comprehensive ranking score. And the comprehensive ranking score is really, it is what it is. And it's not in your control when they do an invitation to apply, or, what the history of how many back-to-back French draws they've done. You just put it in there and then you hope for the best. And that profile will be valid for a year. And as long as you are sure, just like Mark said, that you're not fudging what your not code is just to try to artificially fit into that healthcare category, as long as you are honest, you've got everything backed up in terms of your employment history and your ability to prove that you did the job that you claimed the knock for, then it's up to the government to see what's in their court in terms of when they do invitations to apply. But you want to set yourself up so that you have as many options as possible.
Exactly. And now, as we talk about express entry in detail, I will pull up the comment from Sony TV. Alexa, shed some light on Canada express entry eligibility requirements. Mark, as you would normally say, if only there was a course that would teach you everything about that.
Boy, that would be genius if someone created a course that would really help to kind of accelerate the whole. Wait a minute, there's something out there? That is crazy. Oh, 13 days until the next master class. Boy, there must have been one just last night. That was awesome. That was just full of great questions from the masterclass attendees who were able to come back as many times as they wanted to get additional questions answered. And yeah, complete step-by-step guide. That's, boy, if only something like that existed, that would be so wonderful.
Oh yeah.
So,
And if it
so
costed a little bit, just tiny bit more expensive than a consult, that would be even better.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, all right, here is one of the reasons that I wanted to work with Mark. Right. So I joined the firm, I think about 5 years ago now. I think it is 5 years now,
Yeah.
Mark, that I've been
Yeah.
here. So
Oh,
I
we didn't even have
joined.
a party. Oh.
I know. I joined 5 years ago, and I joined during COVID. And I was working for a non-profit poverty law clinic for refugees. And that was not going to work very well because all of our meetings were in person with clients. And so I said, okay, what can I do where it's online and it's interactive with people in a new way? And the thing that I loved about Mark's model was that we have consults. People pay for them, but we also have the course that Mark has literally, and Igor has poured hours and hours and hours of their heart and soul and their lives and their energy and their talents into. And this course, guys, is not the first incarnation of the course. Like Mark and Igor have redeveloped this course multiple times. And it takes a lot of work to go through every single screen on the Express Entry EAPR fields to make sure that things are up to date, to revise chapters, to add new resources as they get them, to update templates. Some of those are, I've been putting in some templates as well. Whenever we find something that we can make better in the course, we add it in because we know that it'll hopefully be helpful to somebody who cannot afford to hire us to sit through and go through every screen with them and to review every document with them. So the reason that I wanted to work with Mark and with Holthe Immigration Law was because we have resources that are free, like this, right? We have a live Q&A where we can try to help people who really need immigration information. And then we have slightly paid resources like the course where it's a nominal fee, but you get excellent information and resources. Then we actually have consults, and then we have full service. So we can work with people who have the time and the energy and the wherewithal to be able to pay for those services. We've got that too.
Right. And this course.
And that's why, Alicia, that's why I was so stoked when she she reached out to me to have her join us because she's awesome at promoting the things that I love. So, so thank you so much.
Yeah. This course is actually the material that we provide to all of our clients. Whether they purchase the course before they decided to retain us because they just need extra help, or they just retain us right away. Because when we work with our clients, we want them to become knowledgeable about their application. We want them to understand why we put things the way we put them, what are the possible areas where they make mistake, um, how to address those mistakes, how to draft their reference letters, what to expect after they submit their application. So it's like this guide that will walk you step by step all the way from the very beginning of the process, from learning your eligibility requirements all the way to submitting your application and receiving the COPR. So absolutely, if you're thinking about expert entry, you would want to subscribe to the course. Check it out. Again, you can find the link to the course in the description below. Every 2 weeks, we do master classes. So if you don't have an answer to the question, you may just pop in to the master class and ask the question to Mark. So absolutely recommend it. All right, let's move on to the next question from the score is 532. Work permit is expiring in a few days. Do you recommend applying for a dummy extension? If not, what are my options?
So this is where we say, please book a consult, right? We're
Yeah.
not going to give you immigration legal advice without hearing way more about your story. However, in general, just like Mark was saying, make sure that you're not overstaying. Make sure that you're not shooting yourself in the foot by filing an application that immigration could say is misrepresentation. And that makes you inadmissible for 5 years. That is the worst possible outcome, right? It may be possible, depending on how many years of foreign work experience that you have, it may be possible for you to actually increase your score by going home and working for another year in a foreign work, high skilled work. You still have the ability, if you have been here for a while now and you've got a 532, you still have the ability to keep that score for your CEC eligibility until it's been older than 3 years. And if you do that, you might be maximizing your chances and giving yourself the best opportunity for PR. If you stay here with a dummy application and immigration thinks you're working without authorization or studying without authorization, that also makes you inadmissible. So you really want to keep your eye on your overall goal, and that might mean some interim moving to a country, maybe some remote work, right? If you have a visa to another country, if you can't go home to your own country, maybe you can do some work remotely, and that still qualifies for foreign skilled, high skilled work. So please reach out, book a consult. But in general, we are not fans of dummy extension applications.
No.
All right, let's move on to the next one. For some reason, I'm not receiving new comments, so I'm stuck at 31 comments in the list, and I don't get any new ones. So maybe in this live Q&A, we'll just go through the questions that we've already received, because I'm not sure if just people listening attentively to what we're saying and they don't have time to type the question, or if there is a glitch in the system. But the next question will be from Sunshine Mac. Hello everyone, could you confirm that once I have a job offer and a community endorsement letter, I can apply directly to PNP without going through the expression of interest system with the AIP?
No, you cannot. So there are two different things that you may or may not be referring to. One is through AAIP, and there's the rural renewal stream, and that requires a community endorsement letter. There is also the Rural Community Initiatives Program, which is a federal program. And so that involves another sort of community designation letter. So there's two different types of programs, one's federal and one's provincial. But what happens is that even if you have a job offer with an employer so every municipality that is included in the rural communities rural renewal program, each of them has its own way of accepting employers and also whether they will do a community endorsement letter. great, you've gone through that process. But now that you have it, the only way to actually use it towards PR is by submitting that worker EOI with AAIP. So you have to submit that profile. And then it is literally up to AAIP to decide, okay, based on your score and based on a bunch of factors, who are we going to pull, right? Who are we going to give a notification of interest to? So I literally had a client, we'd worked with the employer, we'd done all the advertising and recruiting, we got the community endorsement letter, we put in the worker EOI, and we put rural renewal as our, indicated what program he was interested in. He got an invitation, notification of interest under AOS, right? So it's not up to you in terms of who they give a notification of interest to and in what program. So you, just like I was saying before, you do the work to get everything set up and give yourself the best chance, but then it's up to the Alberta government. In this case, if you're looking at the PNP program, it's up to them to decide who they're going to give a notification of interest to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's go to the next question. Can my wife apply for permanent residence individually and not include me as an accompanying spouse?
Well, this one is also subject to misrep potentially if you don't approach it properly. So, if your spouse is with you here in Canada already, for example, on a spousal open work permit or as a dependent, you are asking for trouble if you are listing them as non-accompanying on an express entry application. With that being said, if your spouse is not here in Canada and they're back in your home country, then there's no issues with listing them as non-accompanying within your application. But they still need to be medically examined and provide police clearances as well as basic information within the application. So, yeah, and it's hard because when you're fighting and you just need a couple more points, but your spouse maybe doesn't have human capital as high as you, and maybe you could increase your score by another 20 points if you didn't include your spouse as accompanying. I get it. But if they're here, Jaspreet, then they go home and then you list them as non-accompanying. Or you have a very good detailed explanation of how they're in the process of leaving and will, not be in Canada as your application is finalized because they have some pressing need that's taking them back. I've had clients before that genuinely have had elderly parents that fell ill, and one of the spouses had to return back to India to care for them because there's no one to do that. And so they were going to go back, care for them, come visit Canada periodically, but they weren't going to be in a position to maintain PR. So, yeah. So that's kind of how I approach it.
Yeah, like IRCC has literally said in a response to a direct question from when lawyers write to them, like, and they gave a case scenario, immigration has literally said it's misrepresentation if both spouses are inside Canada to say that one is actually non-accompanying just for the purposes of getting extra points.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'll be pulling up the questions as I'm trying to figure out the solution to that issue. Perhaps we will just be pulling the comments directly from YouTube. But as I'm trying to figure it out, I'll just pull up this next one. This is from a viewer from Algeria. He has a study permit. He applied for a study permit in Quebec 6 times, and all of those study permits were rejected, even though the application is complete, strong, and very clear. What do we tell those people?
Ding dong.
Yeah, so Igor, this is right in your wheelhouse, but in general, 6 refusals is not a good thing. You definitely have wanted to go do a consult with a lawyer well before you hit 6 refusals, because now it might be beyond repair. But Igor, you can maybe jump in.
Yeah. What I see sometimes people coming for a consult and say that I have a very strong application, and then I open the application and I see just a collection of documents without any sort of explanation for the officer, just dumped into one PDF, sent to the officer, hundreds of pages of bank statements with no explanation of what those bank statements are, some company documents that I own the company, I own a business, I have an uncle who owns a business, we make tons of money, but no explanation whatsoever. Or, for example, a letter of explanation saying, I'm just applying for this school. Here, like attached, you will find my financial documents, my proof of property ownership, and whatsoever, like any other explanations, but without actually diving into the detail why you chose this particular program, why you chose this particular school, what alternatives you have in your home country, how do you plan to sustain yourself in Canada, why you need this education, how it connects to your past, how it also opens doors for you in the future in your home country. And all of that needs to be explained in detail. So whether the application is strong or not, it's hard to tell without seeing the application. And um, if you have 6 refusals, there are some reasons why the officers decide to refuse. With each new refusal, it becomes increasingly harder to get a new study permit approved, especially if you try to pivot all of a sudden, and perhaps choose a different program or disclose something that you have not disclosed in the past. Um, so if you're so desperately trying to get to this school and it takes a couple of months to get a decision on the study permit, you probably wasted like two years of your lifetime. So that education must be so important to you and to your career back home that there's just no way that you may not go to this particular school. And it's very hard to explain why this particular program, why you essentially spend 2 years of your life trying to get to Canada instead of just going and completing this education somewhere else. So absolutely, I would say book a consult. Let's talk. Let's take a look at your application and then identify what were the reasons. I see many refusals where there no justification for the officer to refuse the application. We have some of our clients who worked with us and we prepared an application where we left no stone unturned. Essentially, our practice preparing those temporary resident applications is kind of like this game where you have to guess the next move by the officer and try to prevent him from taking that particular step. So if the officer can refuse on funds, we address funds to a point where there's nothing that he can grab on and refuse.
Yeah.
If he may refuse on proof of temporary intent, we tackle that like with passion, so the officer, even if he wants to find a reason to refuse, he just can't. So that's how we prepare all of those applications. And it's like this game trying to predict the next move by your opponent, kind of like playing chess. So if you're not approaching your application in a similar fashion, then there might be some reasons why the officer could have refused their application, just because you give him this opportunity to grab on something weak, and use that as a justification. So
But you have
absolutely,
to,
yeah,
yeah,
go
but
ahead.
you have to have the facts to back up
Yeah,
that
exactly.
application,
Yeah.
right? So it does depend, right? And
Mhm.
so we're in an interesting position because we've seen, dozens and dozens of cases where people have been approved. We've helped with people who've been approved. We've seen dozens of cases where people tried to do it on their own and they were refused. And we see all the various reasons and kind of differences about what they did that was a red flag to IRCC, or just like Igor said, something that was weak and that IRCC could grab onto. But you cannot manufacture evidence, right? You
Right.
need to make sure that you do have solid marks, you have strong language, you have a good career path, you have really specific reasons why you want to take that course of education. Also, if you're dealing with Quebec, you've got the added layer of going through the whole provincial scheme as well, and now the province. So there are a lot of reasons that study permits are much harder than they seem.
Yeah. I saw one ad on Instagram. One of the lawyers uh, made an ad saying, you don't have to convince the immigration officer of your temporary intent when your study permit application or whatever temporary residence application. And I'm like, what? And then I realized that was a catchphrase for his ad. Essentially, he says, when you prepare a study permit or any other temporary resident application, you have to convince the judge that the officer was unreasonable. So
Yeah.
you have to
You
think one step
guarantee
ahead.
it's going to get refused. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is our presumption now that every temporary resident application is doomed to be refused. And so when we prepare those applications, we call them JR-proof applications, because essentially we just try to knock out all of those areas where the officer can grab on and refuse your application. So yeah, JR proofing the application. That's what we do. Okay. On this note, let's move on to the next question. And this one is from Brian. And if I'm not mistaken, Brian also sent a super chat
Yep. Better
with the
not
same
miss that.
question. Any ideas on why one have not received e-Cooper yet after 13 days
Yeah.
after P2? So
Yeah.
13 days in a super chat, 10 days in the regular comment.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any ideas?
Well, it's just right now, for whatever reason, they're just not prioritizing those as, as a super, of great importance. I don't know if they have just a few officers that are dealing with it, if the system is constantly crashing, I don't know. But we've seen people wait over a month or longer. So 10 days is nothing, my friend. I wish it wasn't that case, but you can expect and just be prepared that it could be over a month or longer.
Exactly. I can share my experience from my family. My sister-in-law, she was approved to permanent residence back in February, I think, end of
Yep.
February. She submitted her photo, she updated her address in the portal, and she waited for about a month and 10 days to get the e-Cooper. She printed the e-Cooper, but then again, that was like in the end of March. Now we're in September, and they still have not checked her photos and her address. So they have not even processed her PR card. So it's like what, 6 months now? Like it takes 6 months to check the photo. Like
Yeah.
I have no idea
Bad.
how it all works, but that's the reality.
Yeah.
All right. Prateet says, I have a 2-year diploma, 3 years of work experience, and Tier 3 in Canada, and 1 year of foreign work experience in social service. Since I'm eligible for both CEC and FSW in a healthcare draw in the healthcare category, will my ITA be under CEC or FSW?
And
Yeah.
so again, Prateet, it's up to what IRCC does. And so if they do a category-based draw, they could say that it is technically a CEC draw, or they could say it's an FSW draw. But I have not seen it as an FSW. So in general, it appears like they're going under CEC when they do a category-based.
Yeah. And when they do a draw, if your work experience that qualifies you through the category-based draw, it's unlikely this is the case, but if if you've got Canadian and foreign work experience, then it's going to say you're drawn under the FSW if it's category-based, if they're using your foreign work experience to get into the category. But generally speaking, if it's just open and you could be drawn under either, they will always do CEC first.
Exactly. And one thing that I can tell is when you submit an application, a profile, then you will receive a confirmation that you're eligible for more than one program. For example, they will have a little table and it says eligibility requirements met for FSW and CC, and then it's just a matter of their decision making, like what draw they do first.
Yeah, but it is a good question, Prateet, because if you look at your ITA, and just like Mark said, it's possible that you only met eligibility for FSW, and when they did the healthcare draw, then your ITA would be under FSW. If that is the case, that makes a difference because now you have to prove settlement funds, right?
Yes.
So keep in mind that FSW, if your ITA says FSW, you do have to prove the settlement funds.
Yeah, and oops, sorry, wrong screen. You see me twice. Okay.
Double a nigger up. Yeah.
So here is an example of how the ITA actually looks like. So there they will just whatever determine the program. Okay. All right. Let's go to the next question from Nash. Are return airplane tickets not required for super visas, unlike regular visitor visas? Visitor visas are increasingly being issued as single entry instead of multiple entry in the past. Okay, who wants to answer this one?
I don't know. I don't have any direct experience with taking a run at any visa application that doesn't have a return trip, unless it's like a work permit or a study permit. Visitors, I always have return flights when but even when we submit it though, like I shouldn't say I always do that. When we file our visitor visas, I often don't have a flight in there because they specifically tell us not to. because if they want to refuse it, then you're on the hook for the flight. But
Yeah.
Alicia, I don't know, what are your thoughts?
I've done a couple super visa applications for Canadian PRs who wanted to bring their parents recently, and we didn't have a return ticket as long as we had really beefy evidence of temporary intent. And so,
Mhm.
really, Nash, it's not a requirement technically for regular visitor visa application or a super visa or any temporary residence application, a study permit, a work permit, a visitor visa. It's not a requirement to have a return airfare and already booked. But that said, you have to prove temporary intent. And so, what does that mean? Well, it means that you are, in the eyes of the officer, very likely to return home. And so, how many family members do you have? What sort of work do you have lined up back home? Do you have bank accounts? Do you have a job? Do you have a leave of absence from work? Do you have some burning reason that's going to bring you back to your home country? Do you have a travel history? Have you gone internationally and complied with your requirements in the past? A whole bunch of factors to talk about temporary intent. And so if you have really strong temporary intent, then you have a better chance. And keep in mind on a super visa, it can be if as long as your parents' passports are valid for up to 10 years, that super visa can be valid and you can have multiple entry where the parents can come for 5 years at a time. So they can literally come, stay for 5 years. So it would not be realistic to have a return ticket necessarily booked if they're staying for a number of years.
Mm-hmm. And maybe I can add here as well, because I've been working on quite a few super visas and TRVs in the past couple of months. Um, I don't view plane tickets as something that will guarantee departure from Canada, and officers don't view them the same way, because you can surrender your airplane ticket, right? Same like with confirmations of your reservations for hotels. Like you can just book a hotel that you can cancel for free even before you come to Canada. So all of that is important if um, if cleverly coupled with other evidence. I would put it this way. But then when you look at the document checklist for TRV, it doesn't have like the generic document checklist. It doesn't have airfare as a mandatory document. Some country-specific document checklists might have those as evidence of your intention to depart from Canada. So absolutely go to check your country-specific document checklist. If you don't know where to find those, just you may Google, you may do your own research, or you may subscribe to our TRV course, where I talk in detail about how to figure out like what documents you need specifically for your visa office. But with the super visas, some parents come like to Canada for 5 years. Some parents come to Canada like for 4 years. You have no idea when the parent will be flying back. So sometimes it just doesn't make sense to buy a return ticket. With a visitor visa, again, you may show it to the officer, but then the officer may not just buy that you're leaving on this specific flight. Maybe your circumstances will change, and you would want to, I don't know, instead of just visiting Niagara Falls, maybe you would want to fly to Calgary and visit Banff as well. So circumstances change. It's better if you have those, but don't count on them as like the cement prove that you will depart Canada. All right. So because I'm unable to pull more questions directly in eCam, I'll try to scan through the questions here.
Yeah, let's hit some of the super chats, Igor.
Yeah.
There's been a couple that have kind of piled in, and then maybe we'll wrap up with the supers.
Yeah. So I'm scanning through the questions, but I think we've answered most of the super chats.
So we
There's one
have,
from Milton.
yeah. So we've got Milton. He says, "Hi." I can read it too, Igor.
Yeah. Go ahead.
He says, "Hi. Can you update about the Francophone Mobilité work permit? Is it CLB 5 or 7?" So I just went on right now just to double check, as always, how to apply for the Francophone. If you're applying on or after June 15, 2023, this has not changed, folks. And so despite whatever was all over the YouTube channels, I hope the consultants revamp their pages and their information on that. It is still 5. It has not changed. So those who are anxious and trying to get that Francophone Mobility work permit, they could any day change that and say, now it's 7, a CLB or NCLC 7 that you need to achieve in order to qualify. But at this stage, they don't. they could also say this is only going to be eligible for skilled work, tier 3 or higher. But at this stage, that's not the case. So it's business as usual, status quo on that. Great question. Lots of people are asking it.
Yeah. There's one more from Mishi.
Nishi,
So
yeah.
that's an empty super chat, but then I found his next comment. He
Okay.
says, I made a mistake on my PR application and I couldn't mention government service experience from the Ministry of Health, which doesn't fall within the last 10 years. So
Yep.
The personal history section asks for the last 10 years, but then it also asks, have you ever worked for the government? So can Mishi update this through the web form?
Yep, do it. Just update it as soon as you can. And this is one of the misconceptions too. And it's once again a poorly worded question. I've never seen immigration really come down hard on someone for failing to disclose something. But at this stage, at least with that particular question, but it is misleading because it almost gives you the impression that everything with respect to your personal history is just restricted to the previous 10 years. But in essence, that question doesn't have a temporal qualifier. So usually we go back to the age of 18 when you become an adult. And it also can be challenging too when people say, okay, well, is this a professional organization? What about what about the National Party in China? A lot of students are required to join the student leagues of these as they go to post-secondary institutions. So does that need to be disclosed? And I'll be honest, my position always is if there's any doubt, just disclose it, include it. 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be, it's not going to cause any more work for you or anything. But even if it did, it's far better to do that than to have them come back and allege misrepresentation.
Right. Next question will be to Alicia specifically, because this is something that we've been working on in the past couple of weeks. So you're going to love this one. The work permit extensions through free trade agreements, for how long they can be extended if approved, particularly CPTPP. I'm from Peru working in Alberta with the postgrad work permit.
So go to the program guidance manuals. So take a look. If you go to the IRCC webpage and you go to LMI exemptions, and then you go down to CPTPP and you go to the LMI exemption code T52. And so you're going to go through that, and then you're going to go at the very base of the page. There are program country specific occupations for each country, and you're going to take a look and see what it says for Peru. But in general, it depends. They have the general program guidance up at the top that talks about whether you are able to have an extension. So again, this is one that requires an employer. So it's employer specific work permit. So you would need your employer to go and do another employer portal offer of employment, and you have to still meet all the same program requirements, right? So yeah. So if you're going to do an extension, then you need to make sure that you meet all the program requirements, and your employer needs to do another offer of employment through the portal before you can do that.
Yeah, but then if you are currently on a postgrad work permit and then you want to apply for CPTPP, there's this initial length of stay of 1 year, and then you can extend. Yeah. All right. Let me just revert back.
Zolcair's got a very long series of questions there, Igor. I don't know if you see it. It's just one little super that kind of popped in. He just basically said, hey, can you answer my previous question? Well, it was a series of 4. And Zolcair, that is not something that we'd be able to give you advice on. Essentially, the question is whether or not a substantial wage increase could trigger non-compliance in essence with that wage adjustment. And does it create a finding of non-compliance, or is there a justification for it? And we strongly encourage your employer to book a consult with us, and we can take a look at that. Right now, if you look at the regulatory provisions, it talks about even a 2% or higher wage increase potentially triggering a finding of non-compliance. But in terms of what to do if there is an issue, judicial review, all of that is really contingent on how things are set up with the original LMIA and how it was described, the role, and not something that we'd be able to offer any substantive legal advice in. this live stream.
Right. There is one more question from Aisha. Hello, the work permit got rejected even though I had an LMA job offer because of my ties in Canada. I've seen a refusal that was reported just recently by one of our colleagues, where the officer refused the work permit application, LMA-based work permit application, even though for apparently not including the LMA in the application, even though the LMA was included, it was mentioned in the submission letter a number of times, and so it was like just officer ignoring everything in that application. So it is possible that the refusal may be unreasonable. So absolutely book a consult. We can take a look at the refusal. We can take a look at your application, identify if the officer ignored evidence. But many people just think that if they have a job offer, an LMA job offer, then their work permit application is guaranteed. No, it's not. You still have to prove temporary intent. And the more ties you have in Canada, the harder it's going to prove that temporary intent. The more time you spend outside your country of origin, and the less ties you have in that country, the more harder it's going to be to prove that temporary intent as well.
Yeah.
So,
and this is something we talk right up front with our corporate clients about, right? So when we're advising corporate clients, when they want to do an LMIA, we say it is so important to vet your potential employees and make sure that they have strong language, make sure that they have strong ties to their home country, make sure that they have a clean history of having traveled internationally and gone back to their home country, because it is entirely possible that they get refused on lack of temporary intent.
yes. Let's see. Andy, who is our member in our channel, I think Andy had like 12 months of membership.
Congratulations, Andy. Andy's a great immigration consultant out in Ottawa. That's where he is. A subscriber to the Canadian Immigration Institute, and that's my daughter trying to call me here. Sorry, guys.
So Andy asks, does the changes to spousal open work permit back in January 2025 affect the open work permit of spouses under free trade agreements, for example, Peru for a free trade agreement?
Yes, so you have to be super careful. It's not just automatically that you're exempted. It depends on the specific free trade agreement.
Yeah. I remember I had a consult, and we had to dig really deep to figure out like whether they still exempted from the new requirements or not, and it turned out that no, they were not exempted, even though one of the spouses had a open work permit. So be very careful. Let's see. OC says that I skipped his question.
That happens a lot.
Yeah.
we definitely can't answer all the questions, that's for sure.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm trying to figure out why my computer gives me trouble today.
Yeah, I'm sensing the same thing as well, but we're kind of into OT here, so we should probably wrap it up, and don't worry, you guys, we will be back at it again here. We will.
Yeah. So probably on this note, we'll then wrap this up. And again, we'll see you next Wednesday, same time, 10 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. So you have 1 week to prepare your hardest questions, and then we'll try to answer those in the next episode. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Take care. See you. Bye.